Book 4, The World, Chapter 1. Pagliano. The lilac was in bloom when we came to the gray walls of Pagliano in that May of '45, and its scent, aroused in the memory of my return to the world, has ever since been to me symbolical of the world itself. Mine was no half-hearted, backward-glancing return. Having determined upon the step, I took it resolutely and completely at a single stride, since Gelato placed his resources at my disposal. To be repaid him later when I should have entered upon the enjoyment of my heritage of Mondolfo, I did not scruple to draw upon them for my needs. I accepted the fine linen and noble raiment that he offered, and I took pleasure in the brave appearance that I made in them, my face shorn now of its beard, and my hair trimmed to a proper length. Similarly, I accepted weapons, money, and a horse. And thus equipped, looking for the first time in my life like a patrician of my own lofty station, I rode forth from Monte Orsaro with Gelato and Gervasio, attended by the former's troop of 20 lances. And from the moment of our setting out there came upon me a curious peace, a happiness, and a great sense of expectancy. No longer was I oppressed by the fear of proving unworthy of the life which I had chosen, as had been the case when that life had been monastic. Gelato was in high spirits to see me so blithe, and he surveyed with pride the figure that I made, vowing that I should prove a worthy son of my father ere all was done. The first act of my new life was performed as we were passing through the village of Pogetta. I called a halt before the doors of that mean hostelry, over which hung what no doubt would still be the same withered bunch of rosemary that had been there in autumn when last I went that way. To the slow-eyed, deep-bosomed girl who lounged against the doorpost to see so fine a company ride by, I gave an order to fetch the taverner. He came with a slouch, a bent back, and humble, timid eyes, a very different attitude from that which he had last adopted towards me. "Where's my mule, you rogue?" quoth I. He looked at me askance. "Your mule magnificent?" said he. "You have forgotten me. I think, forgotten the lad in rusty black who rode this way last autumn and whom you robbed." At the words we turned a sickly yellow and fell to trembling and babbling protestations and excuses. "Have done," I broke in. "You would not buy the mule then. You shall buy it now, and pay for it with interest." "What is this, Agostino?" quoth Gelato at my elbow. "An act of justice, sir," I answered shortly, whereupon he questioned me no further, but looked on with a grim smile. Then to the taverner, "Your manners today are not quite the same as on the last occasion when we met. I spare you the gallows that you may live to profit by the lesson of your present near escape. And now, rogue, 10 ducats for that mule." And I held out my hand. "10 ducats, he cried, and gathering courage perhaps since he was not to hang. "It is twice the value of the beast," he protested. "I know," I said. "It will be 5 ducats for the mule and 5 for your life. I am merciful to rate the latter as cheaply as it deserves. Come, thief, the 10 ducats without more ado, or I'll burn your nest of infamy and hang you above the ruins." He cowered and shriveled. Then he scuttled within doors to fetch the money, whilst Gelato laughed deep in his throat. "You are well advised," said I, when the rogue returned and handed me the ducats. "I told you I should come back to present my reckoning. Be warned by this." As we rode on, Gelato laughed again. "Body of Satan, there's a thoroughness about you, Augustino. As a hermit you did not spare yourself, and now as a tyrant you do not seem likely to spare others." "It is the Anguissolo way," said Gervasio quietly. "You mistake," said I. "I conceive myself in the world for some good purpose, and the act you have witnessed is a part of it. It was not a revengeful deed. Vengeance would have taken a harsher course. It was justice, and justice is righteous. Particularly a justice that puts 10 ducats in your pocket," laughed Gelato. "There, again you mistake me," said I. "My aim is that thieves be mulcted to the end that the poor shall profit." And I drew rein again. A little crowd had gathered about us, mostly of very ragged, half-clad people, for this village of Pogetta was a very poverty-stricken place. Into that little crowd I flung the 10 ducats, with the consequence that on the instant it became a seething, howling, snarling, quarreling mass. In the twinkling of an eye a couple of heads were cracked and blood was flowing, so that to quell the riot my charity had provoked, I was forced to spur my horse forward and bid them with threats disperse. "And I think now," said Gelato when it was done, "that you are just as reckless in the manner of doing charity. For the future, Agostino, You would do well to appoint an almoner. I bit my lip in vexation, but soon I smiled again. Were such little things to fret me? Did we not ride to Pagliano and to Bianca de Cavalcane? At the very thought my pulses would quicken and a sweetness of anticipation would invade my soul, to be clouded at moments by an indefinable dread. And thus we came to Pagliano in that month of May, when the lilac was in bloom, as I have said, and after Fra Gervasio had left us, to return to his convent at Piacenza. We were received in the courtyard of that mighty fortress by that sturdy, hawk-faced man who had recognized me in the hermitage on Monte Orsaro. But he was no longer in armor. He wore a surcoat of yellow velvet, and his eyes were very kindly and affectionate when they rested on Gelato, and from Gelato passed on to take survey of me. "So this is our hermit," quoth he, a note of some surprise in his crisp tones. "Somewhat changed. By a change that goes deeper than his pretty doublet," said Gelato. We dismounted, and grooms in the Cavalcana livery of scarlet with a horse head, in white upon their breasts, led away our horses. The seneschal acted as quartermaster to our lances, whilst Cavalcana himself led us up the great stone staircase with its carved balustrade of marble, from which rose a file of pillars to support the groined ceiling. This last was frescoed in dull red, with a white horse head at intervals. On our right, on every third step, stood orange trees in tubs, all flowering and shedding the most fragrant perfume. Thus we ascended to a spacious gallery, and through a succession of magnificent rooms we came to the noble apartments that had been made ready for us. A couple of pages came to tend me, bringing perfumed water and macerated herbs for my ablutions. These performed, they helped me into fresh garments that awaited me, black hose of finest silk and velvet trunks of the same sable hue, and for my body a fine close-fitting double cloth of gold, caught at the waist by a jeweled girdle from which hung a dagger that was the merest toy. When I was ready, they went before me, to lead the way to what they called the private dining room, where supper awaited us. At the very mention of a private dining room, I had a vision of whitewashed walls and high-set windows, and a floor strewn with rushes. Instead, we came into the most beautiful chamber that I had ever seen. From floor to ceiling it was hung with arras of purple brocade alternating with cloth of gold, thus on 3 sides. On the fourth there was an opening for the embayed window which glowed like a gigantic sapphire in the deepening twilight. The floor was spread with a carpet of the ruddy purple of porphyry, very soft and silent to the feet. From the frescoed ceiling, where a joyous Phoebus drove a team of spirited white stallions, hung a chain that was carved in the semblance of interlocked titans to support a great candelabrum, each branch of which was in the image of a titan holding a stout candle of scented wax. It was all in gilded bronze, and the workmanship, as I was presently to learn, of that great artist and robed Benvenuto Cellini. From this candelabrum there fell upon the board a soft golden radiance that struck bright gleams from crystals and plate of gold and silver. By a buffet laden with meat stood the master of the household in black velvet, his chain of office richly carved, his badge a horse's head in silver, and he was flanked on either hand by a nimble-looking page. Of all this my first glance gathered but the most fleeting of impressions, for my eyes were instantly arrested by her who stood between Cavalcane and Gelato, awaiting my arrival, and, miracle of miracles, she was arrayed exactly as I had seen her in my vision. Her supple maiden body was sheathed in a gown of cloth of silver. Her brown hair was dressed into 2 plaits interlaced with gold threads and set with tiny gems, and these plaits hung one on either breast. Upon the low, white brow a single jewel gleamed, a brilliant of the very whitest fire. Her long blue eyes were raised to look at me as I entered, and their glance grew startled when it encountered mine. The delicate color faded gradually from her cheeks, and her eyes fell at last as she moved forward to bid me welcome to Pagliano in her own name. They must have perceived her emotion as they perceived mine, but they gave no sign. We got to the round table, myself upon Cavalcane's left, Gelato in the place of honor, and Bianca facing her father, so that I was on her right. The seneschal bestirred himself, and the silken ministering pages fluttered round us. My lord of Pagliano was one who kept the table as luxurious as all else in his splendid palace. First came a broth of veal in silver basins, then a stew of cock's combs and capon's breasts, then a ham of a roasted boar, the flesh very lusciously saturated with the flavor of rosemary, and there was venison that was as soft as velvet and other things that I no longer call to mind. And to drink there was a fragrant, well-sunned wine of Lombardy that had been cooled in snow. Gelato ate enormously, Cavalcanti daintily, I but little, and Bianca nothing. Her presence had set up such emotions in me that I had no thought for food. But I drank deeply, and so came presently to a spurious ease which enabled me to take my share in the talk that was toward, though in all is said it was but a slight share, since Cavalcanti and Gelato discoursed of matters wherein my knowledge was not sufficient to enable me to bear a conspicuous part. More than once I was on the point of addressing Bianca herself, but always courage failed me. I had ever in mind the memory she must have of me as she had last seen me, to increase the painful diffidence which her presence itself imposed upon me. Nor did I hear her voice more than once or twice when she demurely answered such questions as her father set her, and though once or twice I found her stealing a look at me, she would instantly avert her eyes when our glances crossed. Thus was our first meeting, and for a little time it was to be our last, because I lacked the courage to seek her out. She had her own apartments at Pagliano with her own maids of honor, like a princess, and the castle garden was entirely her domain, into which even her father seldom intruded. He gave me the freedom of it, but it was a freedom of which I never took advantage in the week that we abode there. Several times was I on the point of doing so, but I was ever restrained by my unconquerable diffidence, and there was something else to impose restraint upon me. Hitherto the memory of Juliana had come to haunt me in my hermitage, by arousing in me yearnings which I had combat with fasting and prayer, with scourge and dice. Now the memory of her haunted me again, but in a vastly different way. It haunted me with the reminder of all the sin in which through her I had steeped myself. And just as the memory of that sin had made me in purer moments deem myself unworthy to be the guardian of the shrine on Monte Orsaro, so now did it cause me to deem myself all unworthy to enter the garden that enshrined Madonna Bianca de Cavalcanti. Before the purity that shone from her, I recoiled in an awe whose nature was as the feelings of religion. I felt that to seek her presence would be almost to defile her, and so I abstained, my mind very full of her the while, for all that the time was beguiled for me in daily exercise with horse and arms under the guidance of Gelato. I was not so tutored merely for the sake of repairing a grave omission in my education. It had a definite scope, as Gelato frankly told me, informing me that the time approached in which to avenge my father and strike a blow for my own rights. And then at the end of a week a man rode into the courtyard of Pagliano one day, and flung down from his horse, shouting to be led to Messer Gelato. There was something about this courier's mien and person that awoke a poignant memory. I was walking the gallery when the clatter of his advent drew my attention, and his voice sent a strange thrill through me. One glance I gave to make quite sure, and then I leapt down the broad steps 4 at a time, and a moment later, to the amazement of all present, I had caught the dusty rider in my arms, and I was kissing the wrinkled, scarred, and leathery old cheeks. "Falcone," I cried. "Falcone, do you not know me?" He was startled by the violence of my passionate onslaught. Indeed, he was almost borne to the ground by it, for his old legs were stiff now from riding. And then, how he stared, what oaths he swore. "Madonnino," he babbled, "Madonnino." And he shook himself free of my embrace, and stood back that he might view me. "Body of Satan, but you are finely grown, and how like to what your father was when he was no older than are you, and they have not made a shaveling of you, after all. Now, blessed be God for that." Then he stopped short, and his eyes went past me, and he seemed to hesitate. I turned, and there, leaning on the balustrade of the staircase, looking on with smiling eyes, stood Gelato with Messer Cavalcanti at his elbow. I heard Galeotto's words to the Lord of Pagliano. "His heart is sound, which is a miracle." That woman, it seems, could not quite dehumanize him. And he came down heavily to ask Falcone what news he bore. The old equerry drew a letter from under his leathern jacket. "From Ferrante?" quoth the Lord of Pagliano eagerly, peering over Galeotto's shoulder. "Aye," said Gelato, and he broke the seal. He stood to read, with knitted brows. "It is well," he said at last, and passed the sheet to Cavalcanti. "Farnese is in Piacenza already, and the Pope will sway the college to give his bastard the ducal crown. It is time we stirred." He turned to Falcone, whilst Cavalcanti read the letter. "Take food and rest, good Gino." For tomorrow you ride again with me, and so shall you, Agostino. I ride again? I echoed, my heart sinking and some of my dismay showing upon my face. Whither? To right the wrongs of Mondolfo, he answered shortly, and turned away. Chapter 2. The Governor of Milan. We rode again upon the morrow, as he had said, and with us went Falcone and the same goodly company of 20 lances that had escorted me from Monte or Sorrow. But I took little thought for them, or pride in such an escort now. My heart was leaden. I had not seen Bianca again ere I departed, and heaven knew when we should return to Pagliano. Thus at least was I answered by Galato, when I made bold to ask the question. 2 days we rode, going by easy stages, and came at last upon that wondrously fair and imposing city of Milan, in the very heart of the vast plain of Lombardy, with the distant Alps for background and northern rampart. Our destination was a castle, and in a splendid antechamber, packed with rustling, silken courtiers and clanking captains in steel, a sprinkling of prelates and handsome, insolent-eyed women, more than one of whom reminded me of Juliana, and every one of whom I disparaged by comparing her with Bianca. Galato and I stood waiting. To many there he seemed known, and several came to greet him and some to whisper in his ear. At last a pert boy in a satin suit that was striped in the imperial livery of black and yellow pushed his way through the throng. Messer Galato, his shrill voice announced, "His Excellency awaits you." Galato took my arm and drew me forward with him. Thus we went through a lane that opened out before us in that courtly throng, and came to a curtained door. An usher raised the curtain for us as sign from the page, who, opening, announced us to the personage within. We stood in a small closet whose tall, slender windows overlooked the courtyard, and from the table, on which there was a wealth of parchments, rose a very courtly gentleman to receive us out of a gilded chair, the arms of which were curiously carved into the shape of serpent heads. He was a well-nourished, florid man of middle height, with a resolute mouth, high cheekbones, and crafty, prominent eyes that reminded me vaguely of the eyes of the taverner Pogetta. He was splendidly dressed in a long gown of crimson damask, edged with lynx fur, and the fingers of his fat hands and one of his thumbs were burdened with jewels. This was Ferrante Gonzaga, Prince of Molfetta, Duke of Ariano, the Emperor's lieutenant and governor of the state of Milan. The smile with which he had been ready to greet Galato froze slightly at sight of me, but before he could voice the question, obviously, in his mind my companion had presented me. "Here, my lord, is one upon whom I trust that we may count when the time comes. This is Agostino d'Anguilla, of Mondolfo and Carmina." Surprise overspread Gonzaga's face. He seemed about to speak and checked, and his eyes were very searchingly bent upon Galeotto's face, which remained inscrutable as stone. Then the governor looked at me, and from me back again at Galato. At last he smiled, whilst I bowed before him, but very vaguely conscious of what might impend. "The time," he said, "seems to be none too distant. The Duke of Castro, this Pierluigi Farnese, is so confident of ultimate success that already he has taken up his residence in Piacenza, and already, I am informed, is being spoken of as Duke of Parma and Piacenza." "He has cause," said Galato. "Who is to withstand his election since the emperor, like Pilate, has washed his hands of the affair?" A smile overspread Gonzaga's crafty face. "Do not assume too much concerning the emperor's wishes in the matter. His answer to the Pope was that if Parma and Piacenza are imperial fiefs, integral parts of the state of Milan, it would ill become the emperor to alienate them from an empire which he holds merely in trust. Whereas if they can be shown rightly to belong to the Holy See, why then the matter concerns him not, and the Holy See may settle it." Galato shrugged, and his face grew dark. "It amounts to an assent," he said. "Not so," purred Gonzaga, seating himself once more. "It amounts to nothing. It is a Sibylline answer, which nowise prejudices what he may do in future. We still hope," he added, "that the Sacred College may refuse the investiture. Pierluigi Farnese is not in good odor in the Curia. The Sacred College cannot withstand the Pope's desires. He has bribed it with the undertaking to restore Nepi and Camerino to the states of the Church in exchange for Parma and Piacenza, which are to form a state for his son. How long, my lord, do you think the college will resist him? The Spanish cardinals all have the emperor's desires at heart. The Spanish cardinals may oppose a measure until they choke themselves with their vehemence," was the ready answer. There are enough of the Pope's creatures to carry the election, and if there were not, it would be his to create more until there should be sufficient for his purpose. It is an old subterfuge. Well then, said Gonzaga, smiling, since you are so assured, it is for you and the nobles of Piacenza to be up and doing. The emperor depends upon you, and you may depend upon him. Galato looked at the governor out of his scarred face, and his eyes were very grave. I had hoped otherwise, he said. That is why I have been slow to move. That is why I have waited. Why I have even committed the treachery of permitting Pier Luigi to suppose me ready at need to engage in his service. Ah, there you play a dangerous game, said Gonzaga frankly. I'll play a more dangerous still ere I have done, he answered stoutly. Neither pope nor devil shall dismay me. I have great wrongs to right, as none knows better than your excellency, and if my life should go in the course of it, why, he shrugged and sneered, it is all that is left me, and life is a little thing when a man has lost all else. I know, said the sly governor, wagging his big head. Else I had not warned you, for we need you, Messer Galato. Aye, you need me. You'll make a tool of me, you and your emperor. You'll use me as a cat's paw to pull down this inconvenient duke. Gonzaga rose, frowning. You go a little far, Messer Galato, he said. I go no farther than you urge me, answered the other. But patience, the lieutenant soothed him, growing sleek again in tone and manner. Consider now the position. What the emperor has answered the pope is no more than the bare and precise truth. It is not clear whether the states of Parma and Piacenza belong to the empire or the Holy See. But let the people rise and show themselves ill-governed. Let them revolt against Farnese once. He has been created their duke, and when thus the state shall have been alienated from the Holy See, and then you may count upon the emperor to step in as your liberator and to buttress up your revolt. Do you promise us so much? Asked Galato. Explicitly, was the ready answer. Upon my most sacred honor, send me word that you are in arms, that the first blow has been struck, and I shall be with you with all the force that I can raise in the emperor's name. Your excellency has warrant for this? Demanded Galato. Should I promise it else? About it, sir, you may work with confidence. With confidence, yes, replied Galato gloomily, but with no great hope. The pontifical government has ground the spirit out of half the nobles of the Val di Taro. They have suffered so much and so repeatedly, in property, in liberty, in life itself, that they are grown rabbit-hearted, and would sooner cling to the little liberty that is still theirs and strike a blow to gain what belongs to them by every right. Oh, I know them of old. What man can do, I shall do, but he shrugged and shook his head sorrowfully. Can you count on none? Asked Gonzaga, very serious, stroking his smooth, fat chin. I can count upon one, answered Galato. The Lord of Pagliano. He is Ghibelline to the very marrow, and he belongs to me. At my bidding there is nothing he will not do. There is an old debt between us, and he is a noble soul who will not leave his debts unpaid. Upon him I can count, and he is rich and powerful. But then, he is not really a Pisantino himself. He holds his fief direct from the emperor. Pagliano is part of the state of Milan, and Cavalcanti is no subject of Farnese. His case, therefore, is exceptional, and he has less than the usual cause for timidity. But the others, again he shrugged, what man can do to stir them? That will I do. You shall hear from me soon again, my lord. Gonzaga looked at me. Did you not say that here is another? Galato smiled sadly. Just one arm and one sword. That is all. Unless this emprise succeeds, he is never like to rule in Mondolfo. He may be counted upon, but he brings no lances with him. I see, said Gonzaga, his lip between thumb and forefinger. But his name, that and his wrongs shall be used. Depend upon it, my lord, the wrongs which are as by inheritance. I said no word. A certain resentment filled me to hear myself so disposed without being consulted, and yet it was tempered by a certain trust in Galato, a faith that he would lead me into nothing unworthy. Gonzaga conducted us to the door of the closet. I shall look to hear from you, Ser Galato, he said, and if at first the nobles of the Val di Taro are not to be moved, perhaps after they have had a taste of Messer Pierluigi's ways, they will gather courage out of despair. I think we may be hopeful if patient. Meanwhile, My master, the emperor, shall be informed. Another moment, and we were out of that florid, crafty, well-nourished presence. The curtains had dropped behind us, and we were thrusting our way through the press in the antechamber, Galato muttering to himself things which, as we gained the open air, I gathered to be curses directed against the emperor and his Milanese lieutenant. In the inn of the Sign of the Sun, by the gigantic Duomo of Ascani's building, he opened the gates to his anger and let it freely forth. "It is a world of cravens," he said, "a world of slothful, self-seeking, supine cowards, Agostino. In the emperor, at least, I conceive that we should have found a man who would not be averse to acting boldly where his interests must be served. More I had not expected of him, but that, at least, and even in that he fails me. Oh, this Charles V, he cried, this prince upon whose dominions the sun never sets. Fortune has bestowed upon him all the favors in her gift. Yet for himself he can do nothing. He is crafty, cruel, irresolute, and mistrustful of all. He is without greatness of any sort, and he is all but emperor of the world. Others must do his work for him. Others must compass the conquest which he is to enjoy. Ah, well, he ended with a sneer, perhaps as the world views these things there is a certain greatness, and that the greatness of the fox. Naturally, there was much in this upon which I needed explanation, and I made bold to intrude upon his anger to crave it, and it was then that I learnt the true position of affairs. Between France and the Empire, the state of Milan had been in contention until quite lately, when Henri II had abandoned it to Charles V, and in the state of Milan were the states of Parma and Piacenza, which Pope Julius II had wrested from it and incorporated in the domain of the Church. The act, however, was unlawful, and although these states had ever since been under pontifical rule, it was to Milan that they belonged, though Milan never yet had had the power to enforce her rights. She had that power at last. Now that the emperor's rule, there was a thing determined, and it was in this moment that papal nepotism was to make a further alienation of them by constituting them into a duchy for the Farnese bastard, Pier Luigi, who was already Duke of Castro. Under papal rule, the nobles, more particularly the Ghibellines, and the lesser tyrants of the Val di Taro had suffered rudely, plundered by pontifical brigandage, enduring confiscations and extortions until they were reduced to a miserable condition. It was against the beginnings of this that my father had raised a standard, to be crushed through the supineness of his peers, who would not support him to save themselves from being consumed in the capacious maw of Rome. But what they had suffered hitherto would be as nothing to what they must suffer if the Pope now had his way, and if Pier Luigi Farnese were to become their duke, an independent prince. He would break the nobles utterly, to remain undisputed master of the territory. That was a conclusion foregone. And yet our princelings saw the evil approaching them, and cowered irresolute to await and suffer it. They had depended, perhaps, upon the emperor, who, it was known, did not favor the investiture, nor would confirm it. It was remembered that Ottavio Farnese, Pier Luigi's son, was married to Margaret of Austria, the emperor's daughter, and that of a Farnese dominion there was to be in Parma and Piacenza, the emperor would prefer that it should be that of his own son-in-law, who will hold the duchy as a fief of the empire. Further was it known that Ottavio was intriguing with Pope and Emperor to gain the investiture in his own father's stead. The unnatural son! I exclaimed upon learning that. Galato looked at me and smiled darkly, stroking his great beard. "Say, rather, the unnatural father," he replied. "More honor to Ottavio Farnese in that he has chosen to forget that he is Pier Luigi's son. It is not a parentage in which any man, be the most abandoned, could take pride." "How so?" quoth I. "You have, indeed, lived out of the world if you know nothing of Pier Luigi Farnese. I should have imagined that some echo of his turpitudes must have penetrated even to a hermitage, that they will be written upon the very face of nature, which he outrages at every step of his infamous life. He is a monster, a sort of antichrist, the most ruthless, bloody, vicious man that ever drew the breath of life. Indeed, there are not wanting those who call him a warlock, a dealer in black magic who has sold his soul to the devil. Though, for that matter, they say the same of the Pope his father, and I doubt not that his magic is just the magic of a wickedness that is scarcely human. There is a fellow named Paolo Giovio, Bishop of Nocera, a charlatan and a wretched dabbler in necromancy and something of an alchemist, who has lately written the life of another Pope's son, Cesare Borgia, who lived nigh upon half a century ago, and who did more than any man to consolidate the states of the church, though his true aim, like Pier Luigi's, was to found a state for himself. I am given to think that for his model of a pope's bastard this Giovio has taken the wretched Farnese rogue, and attribute the son of Alexander VI the vices and infamies of the son of Paul III. Even to attempt to draw a parallel is to insult the memory of the Borgia, for he at least was a great captain and a great ruler, and he knew how to endear to himself the foe that he governed, so that when I was a lad, 30 years ago, there were still those in the Romagna who awaited the Borgia's return and prayed for it as earnestly as pray the faithful for the second coming of Messiah, refusing to believe that he was dead. But this Pier Luigi, he thrust out a lip contemptuously. He is no better than a thief, a murderer, a defiler, a bestial, lecherous dog. And with that he began to relate some of the deeds of this man, and his life, it seemed, was written in blood and filth, a tale of murders and rapes and worse. And when as a climax he told me of the horrible, inhuman outrage done to Cosimo Geri, the young Bishop of Fano, I begged him to cease, for my horror turned me almost physically sick. Point 1. The incident to which Agostino here alludes is fully set forth by Benedetto Varchi at the end of Book 16 of Historia Fiorentina. That bishop was a holy man of very saintly life, Galato insisted, and the deed permitted the German Lutherans to say that here was a new form of martyrdom for saints invented by the Pope's son, and his father pardoned him the deed, and others as bad, by a secret bull, absolving him from all pains and penalties that he might have incurred through youthful frailty or human incontinence. It was a relation of those horrors, I think, which, stir my indignation, spur me even more than the thought of redressing the wrongs which the pontifical or Farnesian government would permit my mother to do me. I held out my hand to Galato. To the utmost of my little might, said I, you may depend upon me in this good cause in which you have engaged. There speaks the son of the house of Anguissola, said he, a light of affection in his steel-colored eyes. And there are your father's wrongs to right, as well as the wrongs of humanity. Remember, by this Pier Luigi was he crushed, whilst those who bore arms with him at Perugia and were taken alive. He paused and turned livid, great beads of perspiration standing upon his brow. I cannot, he faltered, I cannot even now, after all these years, bear to think upon those horrors perpetrated by that monster. I was strangely moved at the sight of emotion in one who seemed emotionless as iron. I left the hermitage, said I, in the hope that I might the better be able to serve God in the world. I think you are showing me the way. Ser Galato. Chapter 3. Pier Luigi Farnese. We left Milan that same day, and there followed for some months a season of wandering through Lombardy, going from castle to castle, from tyranny to tyranny. Just the three of us, Galato and myself with Falcone for our equerry and attendant. Surely something of the fanatic's temperament there must have been in me, for now that I had embraced the cause, I served it with all the fanaticism with which on Monte or Sorrow I sought to be worthy of the course I had taken then. I was become as an apostle, preaching a crusade or holy war against the devil's lieutenant on earth, Messer Pier Luigi Farnese, sometime Duke of Castro, now Duke of Parma and Piacenza, for the investiture duly followed in August of that year, and soon his eye and hand began to be felt throughout the state which the Pope had constituted him a prince. And to the zest that was begotten of pure righteousness, Galato cunningly added yet another and more worldly spur. We were riding one day in late September that year from Cortomadri, where we had spent a month in seeking to stir the Pallavicini to some spirit of resistance, and we were making our way towards Romagnes, the stronghold of that great Lombard family of Dalverm. As we were ambling by a forest path, Galato abruptly turned to me, Falcone at the time being some little way in advance of us, and startled me by his words. Cavalcanti's daughter seemed to move you strangely, Agostino, he said, and watched me turn pale under his keen glance. In my confusion, more or less at random, what should Cavalcanti's daughter be to me? I asked. Why, what you will, I think, he answered, taking my question literally. Cavalcanti would consider the Lord of Mondolfo and Carmina a suitable mate for his daughter. However, he might hesitate to marry her to the lambless Agostino d'Anguissola. He loved your father better than any man that ever lived, and such an alliance was mutually desired. Do you think I need this added spur? Quoth I, nay, I know that you do not, but it is well to know what reward may wait upon our labor. It makes that labor lighter and increases courage. I hung my head without answering him, and we rode silently amain. He had touched me where the flesh was raw and tender. Bianca de Cavalcante. It was a name I uttered like a prayer, like a holy invocation. Just so had I been in a measure content to carry that name and the memory of her sweet face. To consider her as a possible Lady of Mondolfo, when I should once more have come into my own, was to consider things that fill me almost with despair. Again I experienced such hesitations as had kept me from ever seeking her at Pagliano, though I had been given the freedom of her garden. Juliana had left her brand upon me, and though Bianca had by now achieved for me what neither prayers nor fasting could accomplish, and had exorcised the unholy visions of Juliana from my mind, yet when I came to consider Bianca as a possible companion, as something more or something less than a sin thrown into heaven created by my worship of her, there rose between us ever that barrier of murder and adultery, a barrier which not even in imagination did I dare to overstep. I strove to put such thoughts from my mind that I might leave it free to do the work to which I had now vowed myself. All through that winter, we pursued our mission. With the Dalverm, we had but indifferent success, for they accounted themselves safe, being, like Cavalcanti, feudatories of the emperor himself, and nowise included in the territories of Parma and Piacenza. From Romagnese we made our way to the stronghold of the Anguissal of Alberola, my cousins, who gave me a very friendly welcome, and who, though with us in spirit, and particularly urged by their hatred of our Guelphic cousin Cosimo, who was now Pierluigi's favorite, yet hesitated as the others had done. And we met with little better success with Sforza of Sanafira, to whose castle we next repaired, or yet with a Landi, the Scotti, or Confalinieri. Everywhere the same spirit of awe was abroad, and the same pusillanimity, content to hug the little that remained rather than rear its head to demand that which by right belonged. So that when the spring came round again and our mission done, our crusade preached to hearts that would not be inflamed, we turned our steps once more towards Pagliano. We were utterly dispirited men, although for myself, my despondency was tempered a little by the thought that I was to see Bianca once more. Yet before I come to speak of her again, let me have done with these historical matters in so far as they touched ourselves. We had left the nobles unresponsive, as you have seen, but soon the prognostications of the crafty Gonzaga were realized. Soon Farnese, through his excessive tyranny, stung them out of their apathy. The first to feel his iron hand was the Pallavicini, whom he stripped of their lands of Cortomaggiore, taking as hostages Girolamo Pallavicini's wife and mother. Next he hurled his troops against the Dalverm, forcing Romagnese to capitulate, and then seeking similarly to reduce their other fief of Bobbio. Thence upon his all-conquering way, he marched upon Castel San Giovanni, whence he sought to oust the Sforza, and at the same time he committed the mistake of attempting to drive the Gonzaga out of Serragna. This last rashness brought down upon his head the direct personal resentment of Ferrante Gonzaga. With the imperial troops at his heels, the governor of Milan not only intervened to save Serragna for his family, but forced Pierluigi to disgorge Bobbio and Romagnese, restoring them to the Dalverm, and compelled him to raise the siege of San Giovanni, upon which he was at the time engaged, claiming that both these noble houses were feudatories of the empire. Intimidated by that rude lesson, Pierluigi was forced to draw in his steely claws. To console himself, he turned his attention to the Val di Taro and issued an edict commanding all nobles there to disarm, disband their troops, quit their fortresses, and go to reside in the principal cities of their districts. Those who resisted or demurred, he crushed at once with exile and confiscation, and even those who meekly did his will he stripped of all privileges as feudal lords. Even my mother, we heard, was forced to dismiss her trivial garrison, having been ordered to close the citadel of Mondolfo and take up her residence in our palace in the city itself. But she went further than she was bidden. She took the veil in the convent of Santa Chiara, and so retired from the world. The state began to ferment in secret at so much and such harsh tyranny. Farnese was acting in Piacenza as Tarquin of old had acted in his garden, slicing the tallest poppies from their stems. And soon, to swell his treasury, which not even his plunder, brigandage, and extortionate confiscations could fill sufficiently to satisfy his greed, he set himself to look into the past lives of nobles, and to promulgate laws that were retroactive, so that he was enabled to levy fresh fines and perpetrate fresh sequestrations in punishment of deeds that had been done long years ago. Amongst these, we heard that he had Giovanni d'Anguissola decapitated in effigy for his rebellion against the authority of the Holy See, and that my tyrannies of Mondolfo and Carmina were confiscated from me because of my offense in being Giovanni d'Anguissola's son. And presently we heard that Mondolfo had been conferred by Farnese upon his good and loyal servant and captain, the Lord Cosimo d'Anguissola, subject to a tax of 1,000 ducats yearly. Galato ground his teeth and swore horribly when the news was brought us from Piacenza, whilst I felt my heart sink, and the last hope of Bianca, the hope secretly entertained almost against hope itself, withering in my soul. But soon came consolation. Pier Luigi had gone too far. Even rats, when cornered, will turn at bay and bare their teeth for combat. So now the nobles of the Valner and the Val di Taro, the Scotti, the Pallavicini, the Landi, and the Anguissola of Alberola, came one after the other in secret to Pagliano to interview the gloomy Galato. And at one gathering that was secretly held in the chamber of the castle, he lashed them with his furious scorn. "You are come now," he jeered at them, "now that you are maimed, now that you have been bled of half your strength, now that most of your teeth are drawn. Had you but had the spirit and good sense to rise 6 months ago when I summoned you so to do, the struggle had been brief and the victory certain. Now the fight will be all fraught with risk, dangerous to engage and uncertain of issue. But it was these men who themselves have been so pusillanimous at first, who now urge him to take the lead, swearing to follow him to the death, to save for their children what little was still left them. In that spirit I will not lead you a step," he answered them. "If we raise our standard, we fight for all our ancient rights, for all our privileges, and for the restoration of all that has been confiscated. In short, for the expulsion of the Farnese from these lands. If that is your spirit, then I will consider what is to be done. For believe me, open warfare will no longer avail us here. What we have to do must be done by guile. You have waited too long to resolve yourselves. And whilst you have grown weak, Farnese has been growing strong. He has fawned upon and flattered the populace. He has set the people against the nobles. He has pretended that in crushing the nobles he was serving the people, and they, poor fools, have so far believed him that they will run to his banner in any struggle that may ensue. He dismissed them at last with the promise that they should hear from him, and on the morrow, attended by Falcone only, he rode forth again from Pagliano to seek out the Dalverm and the Sforza of Santa Fara and endeavor to engage their interest against the man who had outraged them. And that was early in August of the year 46. I remained at Pagliano by Galeotto's request. He would have no need of me upon his mission, but he might desire me to seek out some of the others of the Val di Taro, with such messages as he should send me. And in all this time I had seen but little of Monna Bianca. We met under her father's eye in that gold and purple dining room, and there I would devoutly, though surreptitiously, feast my eyes upon the exquisite beauty of her. But I seldom spoke to her, and then it was upon the most trivial matters. Whilst although the summer was now full fragrantly unfolded, yet I never dared to intrude into that garden of hers to which I had been bidden, ever restrained by the overwhelming memory of the past. So poignant was this memory that at times I caught myself wondering whether, after all, I had not been mistaken in lending an ear so readily to the arguments of Fra Gervasio, whether Fra Gervasio himself had not been mistaken in assuming that my place was in the world, and whether I had not done best to have carried out my original intention of seeking refuge in some monastery in the lowly position of a lay brother. Meanwhile, the Lord of Pagliano used me in the most affectionate and fatherly manner. But not even this sufficed to encourage me where his daughter was concerned, and I seemed to observe also that Bianca herself, if she did not actually avoid my society, was certainly at no pains to seek it. What the end would have been but for the terrible intervention there was in our affairs, I have often surmised without result. It happened that one day, about a week after Galato had left us, there rode up to the gates of Pagliano a very magnificent company, and there was great braying of horns, stamping of horses, and rattle of arms. My lord Pierluigi Farnese had been on a visit to his city of Parma, and on his return journey had thought well to turn aside into the lands of Oltreppa and pay a visit to the lord of Pagliano, whom he did not love, yet whom, perhaps, it may have been his intention to conciliate, since hurt him he could not. Sufficiently severe had been the lesson he had received for meddling with imperial fiefs, and he must have been mad had he thought of provoking further the resentment of the emperor. To Farnese, Charles V was a sleeping dog. It was as well to leave sleeping. He rode, then, upon his friendly visit into the castle of Pagliano, attended by a vast retinue of courtiers and ladies, pages, lackeys, and a score of men-at-arms. A messenger had ridden on in advance to warn Cavalcanti of the honor that the Duke proposed to do him, and Cavalcanti, relishing the honor no whit, yet submitting out of discreetness, stood to receive his excellency at the foot of the marble staircase with Bianca on one side and myself upon the other. Under the archway they rode, Farnese at the head of the cavalcade. He bestrode a splendid white palfrey, whose mane and tail were henna-dyed, whose crimson velvet trappings trailed almost to the ground. He was dressed in white velvet, even to his thigh boots, which were laced with gold and armed with heavy gold spurs. A scarlet plume was clasped by a great diamond in his velvet cap, and on his right wrist was perched a hooded falcon. He was a tall and gracefully shaped man of something over 40 years of age, black-haired and olive-skinned, wearing a small pointed beard that added length to his face. His nose was aquiline, and he had fine eyes, but under them there were heavy brown shadows, and as he came nearer it was seen that his countenance was marred by an unpleasant eruption of sores. After him came his gentlemen, a round dozen of them, with half that number of splendid ladies, all of very dazzling company. Behind these, in blazing liveries, there was a cloud of pages upon mules and lackeys leading sumpter beasts, and then to afford them an effective background, a gray, steel phalanx of men-at-arms. I describe his entrance as it appeared at a glance, for I did not study it or absorb any of its details. My horrified gaze was held by a figure that rode on his right hand, a queenly woman with a beautiful pale countenance and a lazy, insolent smile. It was Juliana. How she came there, I did not at the moment trouble to reflect. She was there. That was a hideous fact that made me doubt the sight of my own eyes, made me conceive almost that I was at my disordered visions again, the fruit of too much brooding. I felt as if all the blood were being exhausted from my heart, as if my limbs would refuse their office, and I leaned for support against the terminal of the balustrade by which I stood. She saw me, and after the first slight start of astonishment, her lazy smile grew broader and more insolent. I was but indifferently conscious of the hustle about me, of the fact that Cavalcanti himself was holding the Duke's stirrup, whilst the latter got slowly to ground and relinquished his falcon to a groom who wore a perch suspended from his neck, bearing 3 other hooded birds. Similarly, I was no more than conscious of being forced to face the Duke by words that Cavalcanti was uttering. He was presenting me. "This, my lord, is Agostino d'Anguissola." I saw, as through a haze, the swarthy, pustuled visage frown down upon me. I heard a voice which was at once harsh and effeminate and quite detestable, saying in unfriendly tones, "The son of Giovanni d'Anguissola of Mondolfo, eh?" "The same, my lord," said Cavalcanti, adding generously, "Giovanni d'Anguissola was my friend." "It is a friendship that does you little credit, sir," was a harsh answer. "It is not well to befriend the enemies of God." Was it possible that I had heard aright? Had this human foulness dared to speak of God? "That is a matter upon which I will not dispute with a guest," said Cavalcanti with an urbanity of tone belied by the anger that flashed from his brown eyes. At the time I thought him greatly daring, little dreaming that, forewarned of the Duke's coming, his measures were taken, and that one blast from the silver whistle that hung upon his breast would have produced a tide of men-at-arms that would have engulfed and overwhelmed Messer Pierluigi and his suite. Farnese dismissed the matter with a casual laugh, and then a lazy, drawling voice, a voice that once had been sweetest music to my ears, but now was loathsome as the croaking of Stygian frogs, addressed me. "Why, here is a great change, Sir Saint. We had heard you had turned anchorite, and behold you in cloth of gold, shining as you would outdazzle Phoebus." I stood palely before her, striving to keep the loathing from my face, and I was conscious that Bianca had suddenly turned and was regarding us with eyes of grave concern. "I like you better for the change," pursued Juliana, "and I vow that you have grown at least another inch. Have you no word for me, Agostino?" I was forced to answer her. "I trust that all is well with you, Madonna," I said. Her lazy smile grew broader, displaying the dazzling whiteness of her strong teeth. "Why, all is very well with me," said she, and her sidelong glance at the Duke, half mocking, half kindly with an odious kindliness, seemed to give added explanations. That he should have dared bring here this woman whom no doubt he had wrested from his creature Gambara, here into the shrine of my pure and saintly Bianca, was something for which I could have killed him then, for which I hated him far more bitterly than for any of those dark turpitudes that I had heard associated with his odious name. And meanwhile there he stood, that Pope's bastard, leaning over my Bianca, speaking to her, and in his eyes the glow of a dark and unholy fire what time they fed upon her beauty as the slug feeds upon the lily. He seemed to have no thought for any other, nor for the circumstance that he kept us all standing there. "You must come to our court at Piacenza, Madonna," I heard him murmuring. We knew not that so fair a flower was blossoming unseen in this garden of Pagliano. It is not well that such a jewel should be hidden in this gray casket. You were made to queen it in a court, Madonna, and at Piacenza you shall be hailed and honored as its queen. And so he rambled on with his rough and trivial flattery, his foully pimpled face within a foot of hers, and she shrinking before him, very white and mute and frightened. Her father looked on with darkling brows, and Juliana began to gnaw her lip, and look less lazy, whilst in the courtly background there was a respectful murmuring babble, supplying a sycophantic chorus to the Duke's detestable adulation. It was Cavalcanti, at last, who came to his daughter's rescue by a peremptory offer to escort the Duke and his retinue within. Chapter 4. Madonna Bianca. Pier Luigi's original intent had been to spend no more than a night at Pagliano, but when the morrow came, he showed no sign of departing, nor upon the next day, nor yet upon the next. A week passed, and still he lingered, seeming to settle more and more in the stronghold of the Cavalcanti, leaving the business of his duchy to his secretary Filarete and to his council, at the head of which, as I learnt, was my old friend Annibale Caro. And meanwhile Cavalcanti, using great discreetness, suffered the Duke's presence, and gave him in his sweet, most noble entertainment. His position was perilous and precarious in the extreme, and it needed all his strength of character to hold and curb the resentment that boiled within him to see himself thus preyed upon, and that was not the worst. The worst was Pier Luigi's ceaseless attentions to Bianca, the attentions of the satyr for the nymph, a matter in which I think Cavalcanti suffered little less than did I. He hoped for the best, content to wait until cause for action should be forced upon him. And meanwhile that courtly throng took its ease at Pagliano, the garden that hitherto had been Bianca's own sacred domain, the garden into which I had never yet dared set foot, was overrun now by the Duke's gay suite, a cloud of poisonous butterflies. There in the green, shaded alleys they disported themselves. In the lemon grove, in the perfumed rose garden, by hedges of box and screens of purple clematis they fluttered. Bianca sought to keep her chamber in those days, and kept it for as long on each day as was possible to her. But the Duke, hobbling on the terrace, for as a consequence of his journey on horseback he had developed a slight lameness, being all rotten with disease, would grow irritable at her absence, and insistent upon her presence, hinting that her retreat was a discourtesy, so that she was forced to come forth again and suffer his ponderous attentions and gross flatteries. And 3 days later there came another to Pagliano, bidden thither by the Duke, and this other was none else than my cousin Cosimo, who now called himself Lord of Mondolfo, having been invested in that tyranny, as I have said. On the morning after his arrival, we met upon the terrace. "My saintly cousin," was his derisive greeting. "And yet another change in you, out of sackcloth into velvet. The calendar shall know you as St. Weathercock, I think, or, perhaps, St. Mountebank." What followed was equally bitter and sardonic on his part, fiercely and openly hostile on mine. At my hostility he had smiled cruelly. "Be content with what is, my strolling saint," he said, in the tone of one who gives a warning, "unless you be back in your hermitage, or within the walls of some cloister, or even worse. Already have you found it a troublesome matter to busy yourself with the affairs of the world. You were destined for sanctity." He came closer and grew very fierce. "Do not put it upon me to make a saint of you by sending you to heaven. It might end in your own dispatch to hell," said I. "Shall we essay it?" "Body of God!" he snarled, laughter still lingering on his white face. "Is this the mood of your holiness at present? What a bloodthirsty brave are you become! Consider, pray, sir, that if you trouble me I have no need to do my own office of hangman. There is sufficient against you to make the tribunal of the Rota very busy. There is, can you have forgotten it? That little affair at the house of Messer Fafandi. I dropped my glance, browbeaten for an instant. Then I looked at him again and smiled. You are but a poor coward, Messer Cosimo, said I, to use a shadow as a screen. You know that nothing can be proved against me unless Juliana speaks, and that she dare not for her own sake. There are witnesses who will swear that Gambara went to Fafandi's house that night. There is not one to swear that Gambara did not kill Fafandi ere he came forth again, and it is a popular belief, for his traffic with Juliana is well known, as it is well known that she fled with him after murder, which in itself is evidence of a sort. Your Duke has too great a respect for the feelings of the populace, I sneered, to venture to outrage them in such a matter. Besides, I ended, it is impossible to incriminate me without incriminating Juliana, and Messer Pierluigi seems, I should say, unwilling to relinquish the lady to the brutalities of a tribunal. You are greatly daring, said he, and he was pale now, for in that last mention of Juliana, it seemed that I had touched him where he was still sensitive. Daring? I rejoined, it is more than I can say for you. Ser Cosimo, yours is a coward's fall to caution. I thought to spur him. If this failed, I was prepared to strike him, for my temper was beyond control. That he, standing toward me as he did, should dare to mock me was more than I could brook. But at that moment there spoke a harsh voice just behind me. How, sir? What words are these? There, very magnificent in a suit of ivory velvet, stood the Duke. He was leaning heavily upon his cane, and his face was more blotched than ever, the sunken eyes more sunken. Are you seeking to quarrel with the Lord of Mondolfo? Quoth he, and I saw by his smile that he used my cousin's title as a taunt. Behind him was Cavalcanti with Bianca leaning upon his arm, just as I had seen her that day when she came with him to Monte Orsaro, save that now there was a look as of fear in the blue depth of her eyes. A little on one side there was a group composed of 3 of the Duke's gentlemen with Juliana and another of the ladies, and Juliana was watching us with half-veiled eyes. My lord, I answered, very stiff erect, and giving him back look for look, something perhaps of the loathing with which he inspired me imprinted on my face. My lord, you give yourself idle alarms. Ser Cosimo is too cautious to embroil himself. He limped toward me, leaning heavily upon his stick, and it pleased me that a good height though he was forced to look up into my face. There is too much bad Anguilla blood in you, he said. Be careful lest out of our solicitude for you, we should find it well to let our leech attend you. I laughed, looking into his blotched face, considering his lame leg and all the evil humors in him. By my faith, I think it is your excellency needs the attentions of the leech, said I, and flung all present into consternation by that answer. I saw his face turn livid, and I saw the hand shake upon the golden head of his cane. He was very sensitive upon the score of his foul infirmities. His eyes grew baleful as he controlled himself. Then he smiled, displaying a ruin of blackened teeth. You had best take care, he said. It were a pity to cripple such fine limbs as yours. But there is a certain matter upon which the Holy Office might desire to set you some questions. Best be careful, sir, and avoid disagreements with my captains. He turned away. He had the last word, and had left me cold with apprehension, yet warmed by the consciousness that in the brief encounter it was he who had taken the deeper wound. He bowed before Bianca. Oh, pardon me, he said. I did not dream you stood so near. Else no such harsh sound should have offended your fair ears. As for Messer d'Anguilla, he shrugged as who would say, have pity on such a boor. But her answer, crisp and sudden as come words that are spoken on impulse or inspiration, dashed his confidence. Nothing that he said offended me, she told him boldly, almost scornfully. He flashed me a glance that was full of venom, and I saw Cosimo smile, whilst Cavalcanti started slightly at such boldness from his meek child. But the Duke was sufficiently master of himself to bow again. Then am I less aggrieved, said he, and changed the subject. Shall we to the bowling lawn? And his invitation was direct to Bianca, whilst his eyes passed over her father. Without waiting for their answer, his question, indeed, amounting to a command, he turned sharply to my cousin. Your arm, Cosimo, said he, and leaning heavily upon his captain, he went down the broad granite steps, followed by the little knot of courtiers, and lastly by Bianca and her father. As for me, I turned and went indoors, and there was little of the saint left of me in that hour. All was turmoil in my soul, turmoil and hatred and anger. Anon to soothe me came the memory of those sweet words that Bianca had spoken in my defense, and those words emboldened me at last to seek her out as I had never yet dared in all the time that I had spent at Pagliano. I found her that evening, by chance, in the gallery over the courtyard. She was pacing slowly, having fled thither to avoid that hateful throng of courtiers. Seeing me, she smiled timidly, and her smile gave me what little further encouragement I needed. I approached and very earnestly rendered her my thanks for having championed my cause and supported me with the express sign of her approval. She lowered her eyes. Her bosom quickened slightly, and the color ebbed and flowed in her cheeks. "You should not thank me," said she. "What I did was done for justice's sake. I have been presumptuous," I answered humbly, "in conceiving that it might have been for the sake of me. But it was that also," she answered quickly, fearing perhaps that she had pained me. "It offended me that the Duke should attempt to browbeat you. I took pride in you to see you bear yourself so well and return thrust for thrust." "I think your presence must have heartened me," said I. "No pain could be so cruel as to seem base or craven in your eyes." Again the telltale color showed upon her lovely cheek. She began to pace slowly down the gallery, and I beside her. Presently she spoke again. "And yet," she said, "I would have you cautious. Do not wantonly affront the Duke, for he is very powerful." "I have little left to lose," said I. "You have your life," said she, "a life which I have so much misused that it must ever cry out to me in reproach." She gave me a little fluttering, timid glance, and looked away again. Thus we came in silence to the gallery's end, where a marble seat was placed, with gay cushions of painted and gilded leather. She sank to it with a little sigh, and I leaned on the balustrade beside her and slightly over her. And now I grew strangely bold. "Set me some penance," I cried, "that shall make me worthy." Again came that little fluttering, frightened glance. "A penance," quoth she, "I do not understand." "All my life," I explained, "has been a vain striving after something that eluded me. Once I deemed myself devout, and because I had sinned and rendered myself unworthy, you found me a hermit on Monte or Sorrow, seeking by penance to restore myself to the estate from which I had succumbed. That shrine was proved a blasphemy, and so the penance I had done, the signs I believe I had received, were turned to mockery. It was not there that I should save myself. One night I was told so in a vision." She gave an audible gasp and looked at me so fearfully that I fell silent, staring back at her. "You knew!" I cried. Long did her blue, slanting eyes meet my glance without wavering, as never yet they had met it. She seemed to hesitate, and at the same time openly to consider me. "I know now," she breathed. "What do you know?" My voice was tense with excitement. "What was your vision?" she rejoined. "Have I not told you? There appeared to me one who called me back to the world, who assured me that there I should best serve God, who filled me with conviction that she needed me. She addressed me by name, and spoke of a place of which I had never heard until that hour, but which today I know." "And you? And you?" she asked. "What answer did you make?" I called her by name, although until that hour I did not know it. She bowed her head. Emotion set her all a tremble. "It is what I have so often wondered," she confessed, scarce above a whisper. "And it is true as it is strange." "True," I echoed. It was the only true miracle in that place of false ones, and it was so clear a call of destiny that it decided me to return to the world which I had abandoned. And yet I have since wondered why. Here there seems to be no place for me any more than there was yonder. I am devout again with a worldly devotion now, yet with a devotion that must be heaven-inspired. So pure and sweet it is. It has shut out from me all the foulness of that past, and yet I am unworthy. And that is why I cry to you to set me some penance ere I can make my prayer." She could not understand me, nor did she. We were not as ordinary lovers. We were not as man and maid who, meeting and being drawn each to the other, fence and trifle in a pretty game of dalliance until mate opines that the appearances are safe, and that, her resistance having been of a seemly length, she may now make the ardently desired surrender with all war's honors. Nothing of that was in our wooing, a wooing which seemed to us, now that we spoke of it, to have been done when we had scarcely met, done in the vision that I had of her, and the vision that she had of me. With averted eyes, she set me now a question. Madonna Giuliana used you with a certain freedom on her arrival, and I have since heard your name coupled with her own by the Duke's ladies. But I have asked no questions of them. I know how false can be the tongues of courtly folk. I ask it now of you. What is, or was this Madonna Giuliana to you? She was, I answered bitterly, and God pity me that I must say it to you. She was to me what Circe was to the followers of Ulysses. She made a little moan, and I saw her clasp her hands in her lap, and the sound and sight filled me with sorrow and despair. She must know, better that the knowledge should stand between us as a barrier, which both could see, than that it should remain visible only to the eyes of my own soul. To daunt me, oh Bianca, forgive me. I cried, I did not know. I was a poor fool reared in seclusion, and ripened thus for the first temptation that should touch me. That is what on Monte or sorrow I sought to expiate, that I might be worthy of the shrine I guarded then. That is what I would expiate now, that I might be worthy of the shrine whose guardian I would become, the shrine at which I worship now. I was bending very low above her little brown head, in which the threads of the gold coif net gleamed in the fading light. If I had but had my vision sooner, I murmured, how easy it would have been. Can you find mercy for me in your gentle heart? Can you forgive me, Bianca? Oh, Agostino, she answered very sadly, and the sound of my name from her lips, coming so naturally and easily, thrilled me like the sound of the mystic music of Monte or sorrow. What shall I answer you? I cannot now. Give me leisure to think. My mind is all benumbed. You have hurt me so. Me miserable. I cried, I believe you one who erred through excessive holiness, whereas I am one who attempted holiness through excessive error. I had believed you so, oh, Agostino. It was a little wail of pain. Set me a penance. I implored her. What penance can I set you? Will any penance restore to me my shattered faith? I groaned miserably and covered my face with my hands. It seemed that I was indeed come to the end of all my hopes, that the world was become as much a mockery to me as had been the hermitage, that the one was to end for me upon the discovery of fraud, as had the other ended, with the difference that in this case the fraud was in myself. It seemed, indeed, that our first communion must be our last. Ever since she had seen me step into that gold and purple dining room at Pagliano, the incarnation of her vision, as she was the incarnation of mine, Bianca must have waited confidently for this hour, knowing that it was foreordained to come. Bitterness and disillusion were all that it had brought her. And then, ere more could be said, a thin, flute-like voice hissed down the vaulted gallery. Madonna Bianca, to hide your beauty from our hungry eyes, to quench the light by which we guide our footsteps, to banish from us the happiness and joy of your presence. Unkind, unkind. It was the Duke. In his white velvet suit, he looked almost ghostly in the deepening twilight. He hobbled towards us, his stick tapping the black and white squares of the marble floor. He halted before her, and she put aside her emotion, donned a worldly mask, and rose to meet him. Then he looked at me, and his brooding eyes seemed to scan my face. Why, it is Ser Agostino, lord of nothing, he sneered, and down the gallery rang the laugh of my cousin Cosimo, and there came, too, a ripple of other voices. Whether to save me from friction with those steely gentlemen who aimed at grinding me to powder, whether from other motives, Bianca set her fingertips upon the Duke's white sleeve and moved away with him. I leaned against the balustrade, all numb, watching them depart. I saw Cosimo come upon her other side and lean over her as he moved, so slim and graceful, beside her own slight, graceful figure. Then I sank to the cushions of the seat she had vacated, and stayed there with my misery until the night had closed about the place, and the white marble pillars looked ghostly and unreal. Chapter 5. The Warning. I prayed that evening more fervently than I had prayed since quitting Monte or sorrow. It was as if all the influences of my youth, which lately had been shaken off in a stir of intrigue and of rides that seemed the prelude to battle, were closing round me again. Even as a woman had lured me once in the ways to which I seemed predestined, only to drive me back once more frenziedly. So now it almost seemed as if again a woman should have lured me to the world, but to drive me from it again and more resolutely than ever. For I was anew upon the edge of a resolve to have done with all human interests, and to seek the peace and seclusion of the cloister. And then I bethought me of Gervasio. I would go to him for guidance, as I had done aforetime. I would ride on the morrow to seek him out in the convent near Piacenza, to which he had withdrawn. I was disturbed at last by the coming of a page to my chamber with the announcement that my lord was already at supper. I had thoughts of excusing myself, but in the end I went. The repast was spread, as usual, in the banqueting hall of the castle, and about the splendid table was Pier Luigi's company, amounting to nigh upon a score in all. The Duke himself sat on Monna Bianca's right, whilst on her left was Cosimo. Heeding little whether I was observed or not, I sank to a vacant place, midway down the board, between one of the Duke's pretty young gentlemen and one of the ladies of that curious train, a bold-eyed Roman woman, whose name, I remember, was Valeria Caesarini, but who matters nothing in these pages. Almost facing me sat Juliana, but I was hardly conscious of her, or conscious, indeed, of any save Monna Bianca. Once or twice Bianca's glance met mine, but it fell away again upon the instant. She was very pale, and there were wistful lines about her lips. Yet her mood was singular. Her eyes had an unnatural sparkle, and ever and anon she would smile at what was said to her in half-whispers, now by the Duke, now by Cosimo, whilst once or twice she laughed outright. Gone was the usual chill reserve with which she hedged herself about a distance the hateful advances of Pier Luigi. There were moments now when she seemed almost flattered by his vile ogling and adulatory speeches, as if she had been one of those brazen ladies of his court. It wounded me sorely. I could not understand it, lacking the wit to see that this queer mood sprang from the blow I had dealt her, and was the outward manifestation of her own pain at the shattering of the illusion she had harbored concerning myself. And so I sat there moodily, gnawing my lip and scowling darkly upon Pier Luigi and upon my cousin, who was as assiduous in his attentions as his master, and who seemed to be receiving an even greater proportion of her favors. One little thing there was to hearten me. Looking at the Lord of Pagliano, who sat at the table's head, I observed that his glance was dark as it kept watch upon his daughter, that chaste white lily that seemed of a sudden to have assumed such wanton airs. It was a matter that stirred me to battle, and forgotten again were my resolves to seek Gervasio, forgotten all notion of abandoning the world for the second time. Here was work to be done. Bianca was to be guarded. Perhaps it was in this that she would come to have need of me. Once Cosimo caught my gloomy looks, and he leaned over to speak to the Duke, who glanced my way with languid, sneering eyes. He had a score to settle with me for the discomfiture he had that morning suffered at my hands thanks to Bianca's collaboration. He was a clumsy fool, when all is said, and confident now of her support, from the sudden and extreme friendliness of her mood. He ventured to let loose a shaft at me in a tone that all the table might overhear. "That cousin of yours wears a very conventual hangdog look," said he to Cosimo, and then to the lady on my right. "Forgive Valeria," he begged, "the scurvy chance that should have sat a shaveling next to you." Lastly, he turned to me to complete this gross work of offensiveness. "When do you look, sir, to enter the life monastic for which heaven has so clearly designed you?" There were some sycophants who tittered at his stupid pleasantry. Then the table fell silent to hear what answer I should make, and a frown sat like a thundercloud upon the brow of Cavalcanti. I toyed with my goblet, momentarily tempted to fling its contents in his pustule face and risk the consequences. But I bethought me of something else that would make a deadlier missile. Alas! I sighed. I have abandoned the notion, constrained to it. He took my bait. "Constrained," quoth he. "Now, what fool did so constrain you?" "No fool, but circumstance," I answered. "It has occurred to me," I explained, and I boldly held his glance with my own, "that as a simple monk my life will be fraught with perils, seeing that in these times even a bishop is not safe." Saving Bianca, who in her sweet innocence did not so much as dream of the existence of such vileness as that to which I was referring, and by which a saintly man had met his death, I do not imagine that there was a single person present who did not understand to what foul crime I alluded. The silence that followed my words was as oppressive as the silence which in nature preludes thunder. A vivid flame of scarlet had overspread the Duke's countenance. It receded, leaving his cheeks a greenish white, even to the mottling pimples. Abashed, his smoldering eyes fell away before my bold, defiant glance. The fingers of his trembling hand tightened about the slender stem of his Venetian goblet, so that it snapped, and there was a gush of crimson wine upon the snowy napery. His lips were drawn back, like a dog's in the act of snarling, and showed the black stumps of his broken teeth. But he made no sound, uttered no word. It was Cosimo who spoke, half rising as he did so. This insolence, my Lord Duke, must be punished. This insult wiped out. Suffer me. But Pierluigi reached forward across Bianca, set a hand upon my cousin's sleeve, and pressed him back into his seat, silencing him. "Let be," he said, and looked up the board at Cavalcante. "It is for my Lord of Pagliano to say if a guest shall be thus affronted at his board." Cavalcante's face was set and rigid. "You place a heavy burden on my shoulders," said he, "when your excellency, my guest, appeals to me against another guest of mine, against one who is all but friendless and the son of my own best friend, and my worst enemy," cried Pierluigi hotly. "That is your excellency's own concern, not mine," said Cavalcante coldly. "But since you appeal to me, I will say that Messer d'Anguisola's words were ill-judged in such a season. Yet in justice I must add that it is not the way of youth to weigh its words too carefully. And you gave him provocation. When a man, be never so high, permits himself to taunt another, he would do well to see that he is not himself vulnerable to taunts." Farnese rose with a horrible oath, and every one of his gentlemen with him. "My lord," he said, "this is to take sides against me, to endorse the affront." "Then you mistake my intention," rejoined Cavalcante, with an icy dignity. "You appeal to me for judgment, and between guests I must hold the scales dead level, with no thought for the rank of either, of your chivalry. My Lord Duke, you must perceive that I could not do else." It was the simplest way in which he could have told Farnese that he cared nothing for the rank of either, and of reminding His Excellency that Pagliano, being an imperial fief, was not a place where the Duke of Parma might ruffle it unchecked. Messer Pierluigi hesitated, entirely out of countenance. Then his eyes turned to Bianca, and his expression softened. "What says Madonna Bianca?" he inquired, his manner reassuming some measure of its courtliness. "Is her judgment as unmercifully level?" She looked up, startled, and laughed a little excitedly, touched by the tenseness of a situation which she did not understand. "What say I?" quoth she. "Why, that here is a deal of pother about some foolish words." "And there," cried Pierluigi, "spoke, I think, not only beauty but wisdom, Minerva's utterances from the lips of Diana." In glad relief the company echoed his forced laugh, and all sat down again. The incident at an end, and my contempt of the Duke increased to see him permit such a matter be so lightly ended. But that night, when I had retired to my chamber, I was visited by Cavalcante. He was very grave. "Agostino," he said, "let me implore you to be circumspect, to keep a curb upon your bitter tongue. Be patient, boy as I am, and I have more to endure." "I marvel, sir, that you endure it," answered I, for my mood was petulant. "You will marvel less when you are come to my years, if, indeed, you come to them. For if you pursue this course and strike back when such men as Pierluigi tap you, you will not be likely to see old age. Body of Satan, I would that Galato were here. If aught should happen to you," he checked, and set a hand upon my shoulder. "For your father's sake, I love you, Agostino, and I speak as one who loves you." I know," I cried, seizing his hand in a sudden penitence. "I am an ingrate and a fool, and you upheld me nobly at table. Sir, I swear that I will not submit you to so much concern again." He patted my shoulder in a very friendly fashion, and his kindly eyes smiled upon me. "If you but promise that, for your own sake, Agostino, we need say no more. God send this papal byblow takes his departure soon, for he is as unwelcome here as he is unbidden." "The foul toad," said I, "to see him daily, hourly bending over Monna Bianca, whispering and ogling, ugh! It offends you, eh? And for that I love you. There, be circumspect and patient, and all will be well. Put your faith in Galato, and endure insults which you may depend upon him to avenge when the hour strikes." Upon that he left me, and he left me with a certain comfort. And in the days that followed, I acted upon his injunction, though, truth to tell, there was little provocation to do otherwise. The Duke ignored me, and all the gentlemen of his following did the like, including Cosimo. And meanwhile they reveled at Pagliano and made free with the hospitality to which they had not been bidden. Thus sped another week in which I had not the courage again to approach Bianca after what had passed between us at our single interview, nor for that matter was I afforded the opportunity. The Duke and Cosimo were ever at her side, and yet it almost seemed as if the Duke had given place to his captain, for Cosimo's was the greater assiduity now. The days were spent at bowls or Polone within the castle, or upon hawking parties or hunting parties, when presently the Duke's health was sufficiently improved to enable him to sit his horse, and at night there was feasting which Cavalcana must provide, and on some evenings we danced, though that was a diversion in which I took no part, having neither the will nor the art. One night, as I sat in the gallery above the great hall, watching them footing upon the mosaic floor below, Juliana's deep, slow voice behind me stirred me out of my musings. She had espied me up there and had come to join me, although hitherto I had most sedulously avoided her, neither addressing her nor giving her the opportunity to address me since the first brazen speech on her arrival. That white-faced lily, Madonna Bianca de Cavalcanti, seems to have caught the Duke in her net of innocence, said she. I started round as if I had been stung, and at sight of my empurpling face, she slowly smiled, the same hateful smile that I had seen upon her face that day in the garden when Gambara had bargained for her with Fafante. "You are greatly daring," said I. "To take in vain the name of her white innocence?" she answered, smiling superciliously. And then she grew more serious. "Look, Agostino, we were friends once. I would be your friend now. It is a friendship, Madonna, best not given expression. Ha! We are very scrupulous, are we not? Since we have abandoned the ways of holiness, and returned to this world of wickedness, and raised our eyes to the pale purity of the daughter of Cavalcanti." She spoke sneeringly. "What is that to you?" I asked. "Nothing," she answered frankly. "But that another may have raised his eyes to her is something. I am honest with you. If this child is aught to you, and you would not lose her, you would do well to guard her more closely than you are wont. A word in season. That is all my message." "Stay!" I begged her now, for already she was gliding away through the shadows of the gallery. She laughed over her shoulder at me, the very incarnation of effrontery and insolence. "Have I moved you into sensibility?" quoth she. "Will you condescend to questions with one whom you despise? As indeed," she added with stinging scorn, "you have every right to do. Tell me more precisely what you mean." I begged her, for her words had moved me fearfully. "Gesù!" she exclaimed. "Can I be more precise? Must I add counsels? Why, then, I counsel that a change of air might benefit Madonna Bianca's health, and that if my Lord Pagliano is wise, he will send her into retreat in some convent until the Duke's visit here is at an end. And I can promise you that in that case it will be the sooner ended. Now, I think that even a saint should understand me." With that last jibe, she moved resolutely on and left me. Of the jibe, I took little heed. What imported was her warning, and I did not doubt that she had good cause to warn me. I remembered with a shudder her old-time habit of listening at doors. It was very probable that in like manner had she now gathered information that entitled her to give me such advice. It was incredible, and yet I knew that it was true, and I cursed my blindness and Cavalcanti's. What precisely Farnese's designs might be I could not conceive. It was hard to think that he should dare so much as Juliana more than hinted. It may be that, after all, there was no more than just a danger of it, and that her own base interests urged her to do what she could to avert it. In any case, her advice was sound, and perhaps, as she said, the removal of Bianca quietly might be the means of helping Pierluigi's unwelcome visit to an end. Indeed, it was so. It was Bianca who held him at Pagliano, as the blindest idiot should have perceived. That very night, I would seek out Cavalcanti ere I retired to sleep. Chapter 6. The Talons of the Holy Office. Acting upon my resolve, I went to wait for Cavalcanti in the little anteroom that communicated with his bedroom. My patience was tried, for he was singularly late in coming. Fully an hour passed after all the sounds had died down in the castle, and it was known that all had retired, and still there was no sign of him. I asked one of the pages who lounged there waiting for their master, did he think my lord would be in the library, and the boy was conjecturing upon this unusual tardiness of Cavalcanti's in seeking his bed, when the door opened and at last he appeared. When he found me awaiting him, a certain eagerness seemed to light his face. A second's glance showed me that he was in the grip of some unusual agitation. He was pale, with a dull flush under the eyes, and the hand with which he waved away the pages shook, as did his voice when he bade them depart, saying that he desired to be alone with me a while. When the two slim lads had gone, he let himself fall wearily into a tall, carved chair that was placed near an ebony table with silver feet in the middle of the room. But instead of unburdening himself as I fully expected, he looked at me and, "What is it, Agostino?" he inquired. "I have thought," I answered after a moment's hesitation, "of a means by which this unwelcome visit of Farnese's might be brought to an end." And with that I told him as delicately as was possible that I believed Madonna Bianca to be the lodestone that held him there, and that were she removed from his detestable attentions, Pagliano would cease to amuse him and he would go his ways. There was no outburst such as I had almost looked for at the mere suggestion contained in my faltering words. He looked at me gravely and sadly out of that stern face of his. "I would you had given me this advice 2 weeks ago," he said. "But who was to have guessed that this Pope's bastard would have so prolonged his visit? For the rest, however, you are mistaken, Agostino. It is not he who has dared to raise his eyes, as you suppose, to Bianca. Were such the case, I should have killed him with my hands, were he 20 times the Duke of Parma. No, no, my Bianca is being honorably wooed by your cousin Cosimo." I looked at him, amazed. It could not be. I remembered Juliana's words. Juliana did not love me, and were it as he supposed, she would have seen no cause to intervene. Rather might she have taken a malicious pleasure in witnessing my own discomfiture, in seeing the sweet maid to whom I had raised my eyes, snatched away from me by my cousin, who already usurped so much that was my own. "Oh, you must be mistaken," I cried. "Mistaken?" he echoed. He shook his head, smiling bitterly. "There is no possibility of mistake. I am just come from an interview with the Duke and his fine captain. Together they sought me out to ask my daughter's hand for Cosimo d'Anguissola. And you—" I cried, for this thrust aside my every doubt. "And I declined the honor," he answered sternly, rising in his agitation. "I declined it in such terms as to leave them no doubt upon the irrevocable quality of my determination, and then this pestilential Duke had the effrontery to employ smiling menaces, to remind me that he had the power to compel folk to bend the knee to his will, to remind me that behind him he had the might of the pontiff and even of the Holy Office. And when I defied him with the answer that I was a feudatory of the emperor, he suggested that the emperor himself must bow before the court of the Inquisition. My God! I cried in liveliest fear. "An idle threat," he answered contemptuously, and set himself to stride the room, his hands clasped behind his broad back. "What have I to do with the Holy Office?" he snorted. "But they had worse indignities for me, Agostino. They mocked me with a reminder that Giovanni d'Anguissola had been my firmest friend. They told me they knew it to have been my intention that my daughter should become the Lady of Mondolfo, and to cement the friendship by making one state of Pagliano, Mondolfo, and Carmina. And they added that by wedding her to Cosimo d'Anguissola was the way to execute that plan. For Cosimo, Lord of Mondolfo already, should receive Carmina as a wedding gift from the Duke. Was such indeed your intention?" I asked scarce above a whisper. Overawed as men are when they perceive precisely what their folly and wickedness have cost them. He halted before me, and set one hand of his upon my shoulder, looking up into my face. "It has been my fondest dream, Agostino," he said. I groaned. "It is a dream that never could be realized now," said I miserably. "Never indeed." "If Cosimo d'Anguissola continues to be Lord of Mondolfo," he answered, his keen, friendly eyes considering me. I reddened and paled under his glance. "Nor otherwise," said I, "for Monna Bianca holds me in contempt which I deserve. Better 1,000 times that I should have remained out of this world to which you cause me to return, unless, indeed, my present torment is the expiation that is required of me, unless, indeed, I was but brought back that I might pay with suffering for all the evil that I wrought." He smiled a little. "Is it so with you? Why, then, you afflict yourself too soon, boy. You are over-hasty to judge. I am her father, and my little Bianca is a book in which I have studied deeply. I read her better than do you, Agostino. But we will talk of this again." He turned away to resume his pacing, in the very moment in which he had fired me with such exalted hopes. Meanwhile, there is this Farnese dog with his parcel of minions and harlots making a sty of my house. He threatens to remain until I come to what he termed a reasonable mind, until I consent to do his will and allow my daughter to marry his henchman, and he parted from me enjoining me to give the matter thought, and impudently assuring me that in Cosimo d'Anguissola, in that Guelphic jackal, I had a husband worthy of Bianca de Cavalcante. He spoke between his teeth, his eyes kindling angrily again. The remedy, my lord, is to send Bianca hence, I said. Let her seek shelter in a convent until Messer Pierluigi shall have taken his departure. And if she is no longer here, Cosimo will have little inclination to linger. He flung back his head, and there was defiance in every line of his clear-cut face. Never, he snapped. The thing could have been done 2 weeks ago, when they first came. It would have seemed that the step was determined before his coming, and that in my independence I would not alter my plans. But to do it now were to show fear of him, and that is not my way. Go, Agostino. Let me have the night to think. I know not how to act, but we will talk again tomorrow. It was best so. Best leave it to night to bring counsel, for we were face to face with grave issues which might need determining sword in hand. That I slept little will be readily conceived. I plagued my mind with this matter of Cosimo's suit, thinking that I saw the ultimate intent, to bring Pagliano under the ducal sway by rendering master of it one who was devoted to Farnese. And then, too, I would think of that other thing that Cavalcante had said, that I had been hasty in my judgment of his daughter's mind. My hopes rose and tortured me with the suspense they held. Then came to me the awful thought that here there might be a measure of retribution, and that it might be intended as my punishment that Cosimo, whom I had unconsciously bested in my sinful passion, should best me now in this pure and holy love. I was astir betimes, and out in the gardens before any, hoping, I think, that Bianca, too, might seek the early morning peace of that place, and that so we might have speech. Instead, it was Juliana who came to me. I had been pacing the terrace some 10 minutes, inhaling the matutinal fragrance, drawing my hands through the cool, through that glistened upon the boxwood hedges, when I saw her issue from the loggia that opened to the gardens. Upon her coming, I turned to go within, and I would have passed her without a word, but that she put forth a hand to detain me. I was seeking you, Agostino, she said in greeting. Having found me, Madonna, you will give me leave to go, said I, but she was resolutely barring my way. A slow smile parted her scarlet lips and broke over that ivory countenance that once I had deemed so lovely and now I loathed. I mind me another occasion in a garden betimes one morning when you were in no such haste to shun me. I crimsoned under her insolent regard. Have you the courage to remember? I exclaimed. Half the art of life is to harbor happy memories, said she. Happy, quoth I. Do you deny that we were happy on that morning? It would be just about this time of year, 2 years ago. And what a change in you since then. Hego, and yet men say that woman is inconstant. I did not know you then, I answered harshly. And do you know me now? Has womanhood no mysteries for you, since you gathered wisdom in the wilderness? I looked at her with detestation in my eyes. The effrontery, the ease and insolence of her bearing, all confirmed my conviction of her utter shamelessness and heartlessness. The day after your husband died, I said, I saw you in a dell near Castel Guelfo with my Lord Gambara. In that hour I knew you. She bit her lip, then smiled again. What would you? Answered she. Through your folly and crime I was become an outcast. I went in danger of my life. You had basely deserted me. My Lord Gambara, more generous, offered me shelter and protection. I was not born for martyrdom in dungeons, she added, and sighed with smiling plaintiveness. Are you of all men the one to blame me? I have not the right, I know, I answered, nor do I blame you more than I blame myself. But since I blame myself most bitterly, since I despise and hate myself for what is past, you may judge what my feelings are for you. And judging them, I think it were well you gave me leave to go. I came to speak of other than ourselves. Ser Agostino, she answered, all unmoved still by my scorn, or leastways showing nothing of what emotions might be hers. It is of that simpering daughter of my lord of Pagliano. There is nothing I could less desire to hear you talk upon. said I. It is so very like a man to scorn the thing I could tell him after he has already heard it from me. The thing you told me was false, said I. It was begotten of fear to see your own base interest thwarted. It is proven so by the circumstance that the Duke has sought the hand of Madonna Bianca for Cosimo d'Anguissola. For Cosimo? She cried, and I never saw her so serious and thoughtful. For Cosimo? You are sure of this? The urgency of her tone was such that it held me there and compelled my answer. I have it from my lord himself. She knit her brows, her eyes upon the ground. Then slowly she raised them and looked at me again, the same unusual seriousness and alertness in every line of her face. Why, by what dark ways does he burrow to his ends? She mused. And then her eyes grew lively, her expression cunning and vengeful. I see it, she exclaimed. Oh, it is as clear as crystal. This is the Roman manner of using complaisant husbands. Madonna, I rebuked her angrily, angry to think that anyone should conceive that Bianca could be so abused. Gesù, she returned with a shrug. The thing is plain enough if you will but look at it. Here His Excellency dares nothing, lest he should provoke the resentment of that uncompromising lord of Pagliano. But once she is safely away, as Cosimo's wife. Stop, I cried, putting out a hand as if I would cover her mouth. Then, collecting myself, do you suggest that Cosimo could lend himself to so infamous a compact? Lend himself? That pander? You do not know your cousin. If you have any interest in this Madonna Bianca, you will get her hence without delay, and see that Pierluigi has no knowledge of the convent to which she is consigned. He enjoys the privileges of a papal offspring, and there is no sanctuary he will respect. So let the thing be done speedily and in secret. I looked at her between doubt and horror. Why should you mistrust me? She asked, answering my look. I have been frank with you. It is not you nor that white-faced ninny I would serve. You may both go hang for me, though I loved you once, Agostino. And the sudden tenderness of tone and smile were infinitely mocking. No, no, beloved, if I meddle in this at all, it is because my own interests are in peril. I shuddered at the cold, matter-of-fact tone in which she alluded to such interests as those which she could have in Pierluigi. I shrink and cringe, Sir Saint, she sneered. Having cast me off and taken up holiness, you have the right, of course. And with that she moved past me and down the terrace steps without ever turning her head to look at me again. And that was the last I ever saw of her, as you shall find, though little was it to have been supposed so then. I stood hesitating, half-minded to go after her and question her more closely as to what she knew and what she did no more than surmise. But then I reflected that it mattered little. What really mattered was that her good advice should be acted upon without delay. I went towards the house, and in the loggia came face to face with Cosimo, still pursuing the old love. He greeted me, smiling and jerking his head in the direction of Juliana. We ever return to in the end, they say. Yet you had best have a care. It is not well to cross my lord Pierluigi in such matters. He can be a very jealous tyrant. I wonder was there some double meaning in the words. I made shift to pass on, leaving his taunt unanswered, when suddenly he stepped up to me and tapped my shoulder. One other thing, sweet cousin, you little deserve a warning at my hands. Yet you shall have it. Make haste to shake the dust of Pagliano from your feet. An evil is hanging over you here. I looked into his wickedly handsome face and smiled coldly. It is a warning which in my turn I will give to you, you jackal, said I, and watched the expression of his countenance grow set and frozen, the color recede from it. What do you mean? He growled, touched the suspicion of my knowledge by the term I had employed. What things has that troll dared to... I cut in. I mean, sir, to warn you, do not drive me to do more. We were quite alone. Behind us stretched a long, empty room, before us the empty gardens. He was without weapons, as was I, but my manner was so fierce that he recoiled before me, in positive fear of my hands, I think. I swung on my heel and pursued my way. I went above to seek Cavalcanti and found him newly risen, wrapped in a gown of miniver. He received me with the news that having given the matter thought, he had determined to sacrifice his pride and remove Bianca not later than the morrow, as soon as he could arrange it. And to arrange it, he would ride forth at once. I offered to go with him, and that offer he accepted, whereafter I lounged in his antechamber waiting until he should be dressed, and considering whether to impart to him the further information I had that morning gleaned. In the end, I decided not to do so, unable to bring myself to tell him that so much turpitude might possibly be plotting against Bianca. It was a statement that soiled her, so it seemed to me, indeed, I could scarcely bear to think of it. Presently he came forth full dressed, booted, and armed, and we went along the corridor and out upon the gallery. As side by side we were descending the steps, we caught sight of a singular group in the courtyard. 6 mounted men in black were drawn up there, and a little in the foreground a 7th, in a corselet of blackened steel and with a steel cap upon his head, stood by his horse in conversation with Farnese. In attendance upon the Duke were Cosimo and some 3 of his gentlemen. We halted upon the steps, and I felt Cavalcanti's hand suddenly tighten upon my arm. "What is it?" I asked innocently, entirely unalarmed. "These are familiars of the Holy Office," he answered me, his tone very grave. In that moment the Duke, turning, espied us. He came towards the staircase to meet us, and his face, too, was very solemn. We went down, I feel, by a strange uneasiness, which I am sure was entirely shared by Cavalcanti. "Evil tidings, my lord of Pagliano," said Farnese. "The Holy Office is sent to arrest the person of Agostino d'Anguissola, for whom it has been seeking for over a year." "For me?" I cried, stepping forward ahead of Cavalcanti. "What has the Holy Office to do with me?" The leading familiar advanced. "If you are Agostino d'Anguissola, there is a charge of sacrilege against you, for which you are required to answer before the courts of the Holy Office in Rome." "Sacrilege?" I echoed, entirely bewildered. For my first thought had been that here might be something concerning the death of Fafani, and that the dread tribunal of the Inquisition dealing with the matter secretly. There would be no disclosures to be feared by those who had evoked its power. The thought was, after all, a foolish one, for the death of Fafani was a matter that concerned the Ruota and the open courts, and those, as I well knew, did not dare to move against me on Messagambar's account. Of what sacrilege can I be guilty? I asked. "The tribunal will inform you," replied the familiar, a tall, sallow, elderly man. "The tribunal will need, then, to await some other opportunity," said Cavalcanti suddenly. "Messer d'Anguissola is my guest, and my guests are not so rudely plucked forth from Pagliano." The Duke drew away and leaned upon the arm of Cosimo, watching. Behind me in the gallery I heard a rustle of feminine gowns, but I did not turn to look. My eyes were upon the stern sable figure of the familiar. "You will not be so ill-advised, my lord," he was saying, "as to compel us to use force. You will not, I trust, be so ill-advised as to attempt it," laughed Cavalcanti, tossing his great head. "I have 50 men-at-arms within these walls, Messer Blackclothes." The familiar bowed. "That being so, the force for today is yours, as you say. But I would solemnly warn you not to employ it contumaciously against the officers of the Holy Office, nor to hinder them in the duty which they are here to perform, lest you render yourself the object of their just resentment." Cavalcanti took a step forward, his face purple with anger that this tipstaff ruffian should take such a tone with him. But in that instant I seized his arm. "It is a trap," I muttered in his ear. "Beware." I was no more than in time. I had surprised upon Farnese's mottled face a sly smile, the smile of the cat which sees the mouse come venturing from its lair, and I saw the smile perish, to confirm my suspicions, when at my whispered words Cavalcanti checked his rashness. Still holding him by the arm, I turned to the familiar. "I shall surrender to you in a moment, sir," said I. "Meanwhile, and you, gentlemen, give us leave apart." And I drew the bewildered Cavalcanti aside, and down the courtyard under the colonnade of the gallery. "My lord, be wise for Bianca's sake," I implored him. "I am assured that here is nothing but a trap baited for you. Do not gorge their bait as your valor urges you. Defeat them, my lord, by circumspection. Do you not see that if you resist the Holy Office, they can issue a ban against you, and that against such a ban not even the emperor can defend you? Indeed, if they told him that his feudatory, the Lord Pagliano, had been guilty of contumaciously thwarting the ends of the Holy Inquisition, that bigot Charles V would be the first to deliver you over to the ghastly practices of that tribunal. It should not need, my lord, that I should tell you this." "My God!" He groaned in utter misery. But you, Agostino? There is nothing against me, I answered impatiently. What sacrilege have I ever committed? The thing is a trumped-up business, conceived with a foul purpose by Messer Pierluigi there. Courage, then, and self-restraint, and thus we shall foil their aims. Come, my lord, I will ride to Rome with them, and do not doubt that I shall return very soon. He looked at me with eyes that were full of trouble, indecision in every line of face that was wont to look so resolute. He knew himself between the sword and the wall. I would that Gelato were here, cried that man usually so self-reliant. What will he say to me when he comes? You were a sacred charge, boy. Say to him that I will be returning shortly, which must be true. Come, then, you may serve me this way. The other way you will but have to endure ultimate arrest, and so leave Bianca at their mercy, which is precisely what they seek. He braced himself at the thought of Bianca. We turned, and in silence we paced back, quite leisurely as if entirely at our ease, for all that Cavalcanti's face had grown very haggard. I yield me, sir, I said to the familiar. A wise decision, sneered the Duke. I trust you'll find it so, my lord, I answered, sneering too. They led forward a horse for me, and when I had embraced Cavalcanti, I mounted, and my funereal escort closed about me. We rode across the courtyard under the startled eyes of the folk of Pagliano, for the familiars of the Holy Office were dread and fearful objects even to the stoutest-hearted man. As we neared the gateway, a shrill cry rang out on the morning air. Agostino. Fear and tenderness and pain were all blent in that cry. I swung round in the saddle to behold the white form of Bianca, standing in the gallery with parted lips and startled eyes that were gazing after me, her arms outheld. And then, even as I looked, she crumpled and sank with a little moan into the arms of the ladies who were with her. I looked at Pierluigi, and from the depths of my heart, I cursed him, and I prayed that the day might not be far distant when he should be made to pay for all the sins of his recreant life. And then, as we rode out into the open country, my thoughts were turned to tender matters, and it came to me that when all was done, that cry of Bianca's made it worth while to have been seized by the talons of the Holy Office. Chapter 7. The Papal Bull. And now, that you may understand to the full the thing that happened, it is necessary that I should relate it here in its proper sequence, although that must entail my own withdrawal for a time from pages upon which too long I have intruded my own doings and thoughts and feelings. I set it down as it was told to me later by those who bore their share in it, and particularly by Falcone, who, as you shall learn, came to be a witness of all, and retailed me the affair with the greatest detail of what this one said and how that one looked. I reached Rome on the 4th day after my setting out with my grim escort, and on that same day, at much the same hour as that in which the door of my dungeon in Sant' Angelo closed upon me, Gelato rode into the courtyard of Pagliano on his return from his treasonable journey. He was attended only by Falcone, and it so chanced that his arrival was witnessed by Farnese, who with various members of his suite was lounging in the gallery at the time. Surprise was mutual at the encounter, for Gelato had known nothing of the Duke's sojourn at Pagliano, believing him to be still at Parma, whilst the Duke as little suspected that of the 50 men-at-arms garrisoned in Pagliano, 60 lances were Galeotto's free company. But at sight of this condottiero, whose true aims he was far from suspecting, and whose services he was eager to enlist, the Duke heaved himself up from his seat and went down the staircase shouting greetings to the soldier, and playfully calling him Gelato, in its double sense, and craving to know where he had been hiding himself this while. The condottiero swung down from his saddle unaided, a thing which he could do even when full armed, and stood before Farnese, a grim, dust-stained figure, with a curious smile twisting his scarred face. "Why," said he in answer, "I have been upon business that concerns your magnificence somewhat closely." And with Falcone at his heels he advanced, the horses relinquished to the grooms who had hastened forward. "Upon business that concerns me?" quoth the Duke, intrigued. "Why, yes," said Gelato, who stood now face to face with Farnese at the foot of the steps up which the Duke's attendants were straggling. "I have been recruiting forces, and since one of these days your magnificence is to give me occupation, you will see that the matter concerns you." Above leaned Cavalcanti, his face gray and haggard, without the heart to relish the wicked humor of Gelato that could make jests for his own entertainment. True, there was also Falcone to overhear, appreciate, and grin under cover of his great brown hand. Does this mean that you are come to your senses on the score of a stipend, Ser Gelato? Quoth the Duke. I am not a trader out of the Giudecca to haggle over my wares, replied the burly condottiero. But I nothing doubt that your magnificence, and I will come to an understanding at the last. 5,000 ducats yearly is my offer, said Farnese, provided that you bring 300 lances. Ah, well, said Gelato softly, you may come to regret one of these days, Highness, that you did not think well to pay me the price I ask. Regret? Quoth the Duke, with a frown of displeasure at so much frankness. When you see me engage in the service of some other, Gelato explained, you need a condottiero, my lord, and you may come to need one even more than you do now. I have the Lord of Mondolfo, said the Duke. Gelato stared at him with round eyes. The Lord of Mondolfo? Quoth he, intentionally uncomprehending. You have not heard? Why, here he stands. And he waved a jeweled hand towards Cosimo, a handsome figure in green and blue, standing nearest to Farnese. Gelato looked at this Anguissula, and his brow grew very black. So, he said slowly, you are the Lord of Mondolfo, eh? I think you are very brave. I trust my valor will not be lacking when the proof of it is needed, answered Cosimo haughtily, feeling the other's unfriendly mood and responding to it. It cannot, said Gelato, since you have the courage to assume that title, for the lordship of Mondolfo is an unlucky one to bear. Ser Cosimo, Giovanni d'Anguissula was unhappy in all things, and his was a truly miserable end. His father before him was poisoned by his best friend, and as for the lass who legitimately bore that title, why, none can say that the poor lad was fortunate. The lass who legitimately bore that title, cried Cosimo, very ruffled. I think, sir, it is your aim to affront me. And what is more, continued the condottiero, as if Cosimo had not spoken, not only are the lords of Mondolfo unlucky in themselves, but they are a source of ill luck to those they serve. Giovanni's father had betaken service with Cesare Borgia, when the latter's ruin came at the hands of Pope Julius II. What Giovanni's own friendship cost his friends none knows better than your highness. So that, when all is said, I think you had better look about you for another condottiero magnificent. The magnificent stood gnawing his beard and brooding darkly, for he was a grossly superstitious fellow who studied omens and dabbled in horoscopes, divinations, and the like. And he was struck by the thing that Gelato said. He looked at Cosimo darkly. But Cosimo laughed. Who believes such old wives' tales? Not I for one. The more fool you, snapped the Duke. Indeed, indeed, Gelato applauded. A disbelief in omens can but spring from an ignorance of such matters. You should study them, Messer Cosimo. I have done so, and I tell you that the lordship of Mondolfo is unlucky to all dark-complexioned men. And when such a man has a mole under the left ear as you have, in itself a sign of death by hanging, it is well to avoid all risks. Now that is very strange, muttered the Duke, much struck by this whittling down of Cosimo's chances, whilst Cosimo shrugged impatiently and smiled contemptuously. You seem to be greatly versed in these matters, Ser Gelato, added Farnese. He who would succeed in whatever he may undertake should qualify to read all signs, said Gelato sententiously. I have sought this knowledge. Do you see aught in me that you can read? Inquired the Duke in all seriousness. Gelato considered him a moment without any trace in his eyes of the wicked mockery that filled his soul. Why, he answered slowly, not in your own person magnificent, leastways, not upon so brief a glance. But since you ask me, I have lately been considering the new coinage of your highness. Yes, yes, exclaimed the Duke, all eagerness, while several of his followers came crowding nearer, for all the world is interested in omens. What do you read there? Your fate, I think. My fate. Have you a coin upon you? Farnese produced a gold ducat, fire new from a mint. The condottiero took it and placed his finger upon the 4 letters PLAC, the abbreviation of Placentia in the inscription. PLAC, he spelled. That contains your fate magnificent, and you may read it for yourself. And he returned the coin to the Duke, who stared at the letters foolishly and then at this reader of omens. But what is the meaning of plaque? He asked, and he had paled a little with excitement. I have a feeling that it is a sign. I cannot say more. I can but point out to you, my lord, and leave the deciphering of it to yourself, who are more skilled than most men in such matters. Have I your excellency's leave to go doff this dusty garb? He concluded. I go, sir, answered the duke abstractedly, puzzling now with knitted brows over the coin that bore his image. Come, Falcone, said Galato, and with his equerry at his heels, he set his foot on the first step. Cosimo leaned forward, a sneer on his white hawk face. I trust, Ser Galato, that you are a better condottiero than a charlatan. And you, sir, said Galato, smiling his sweetest in return, are, I trust, a better charlatan than a condottiero. He went up the stairs, the gaudy throng making way before him, and he came at last to the top, where stood the lord of Pagliano awaiting him, a great trouble in his eyes. They clasped hands in silence, and Cavalcanti went in person to lead his guest to his apartments. You have not a happy air, said Galato as they went, and body of God, it is no matter for marvel, considering the company you keep. How long has the Farnese beast been here? His visit is now in its third week, said Cavalcanti, answering mechanically. Galato swore in sheer surprise. By the host, and what keeps him? Cavalcanti shrugged and let his arms fall to his sides. To Galato this proud, stern baron seemed most oddly dispirited. I see that we must talk, he said. Things are speeding well and swiftly now, he added, dropping his voice. But more of that presently. I have much to tell you. When they had reached the chamber that was Galeotto's, and the doors were closed and Falcone was unbuckling his master's spurs. Now for my news, said the condottiero. But first, to spare me repetitions, let us have Agostino here. Where is he? The look on Cavalcanti's face caused Galato to throw up his head like a spirited animal that sensed danger. Where is he? He repeated, and old Falcone's fingers fell idle upon the buckle on which they were engaged. Cavalcanti's answer was a groan. He flung his long arms to the ceiling, as if invoking heaven's aid. Then he let them fall again heavily, all strength gone out of them. Galato stood an instant looking at him and turning very white. Suddenly he stepped forward, leaving Falcone upon his knees. What is this? He said, his voice a rumble of thunder. Where is the boy? I say. The lord of Pagliano could not meet the gaze of those steel-colored eyes. Oh, God, he groaned. How shall I tell you? Is he dead? Asked Galato, his voice hard. No, not dead. But, the plight of one usually so strong, so full of master and arrogance, was pitiful. But what? Demanded the condottiero. Gesù, am I a woman or a man without sorrows, that you need to stand hesitating? Whatever it may be, speak, then, and tell me. He is in the clutches of the Holy Office, answered Cavalcanti miserably. Galato looked at him, his pallor increasing. Then he sat down suddenly, and elbows on knees, he took his head in his hands and spoke no word for a spell, during which time Falcone, still kneeling, looked from one to the other in an agony of apprehension and impatience to hear more. Neither noticed the presence of the equerry, nor would it have mattered if they had, for he was trusty as steel, and they had no secrets from him. At last, having gained some measure of self-control, Galato begged to know what had happened, and Cavalcanti related the event. What could I do? What could I do? He cried when he had finished. You let them take him? Said Galato, like a man who repeats the thing he's been told, because he cannot credit it. You let them take him? What alternative had I? Groaned Cavalcanti, his face ashen and seared with pain. There is that between us, Ettore, that will not let me credit this, even though you tell it me. And now the wretched lord of Pagliano began to use the very arguments that I had used to him. He spoke of Cosimo's suit of his daughter, and how the duke sought to constrain him to consent to the alliance. He urged that in this matter the Holy Office was a trap set for him to place him in Farnese's power. A trap? Roared the condottiero, leaping up. What trap? Where is this trap? You had 50 men-at-arms under your orders here, 70 of them my own men, each one of whom would have laid down his life for me. And you allowed the boy to be taken hence by 6 rascals from the Holy Office, intimidated by a paltry score of troopers that rode with this filthy duke. Nay, not that, the other protested. Had I dared to raise a finger, I should have brought myself within the reach of the Inquisition without benefiting Agostino. That was the trap, as Agostino himself perceived. It was he himself who urged me not to intervene, but to let them take him hence, since there was no possible charge which the Holy Office could prefer against him. No charge, cried Galato with a withering scorn. Did villainy ever want for invention? And this trap? Body of God, Eteri, am I to account you a fool after all these years? What trap was there that could be sprung upon you as things stood? Why, man, the game was in your hands entirely. Here was this Farnese in your power. What better hostage than that could you have held? You had but to whistle your war dogs a heel and seize his person, demanding of the Pope his father a plenary absolution, an indemnity for yourself and for Agostino from any prosecutions of the Holy Office ere you surrendered him. And had they attempted to employ force against you, you could have held him in check by threatening to hang the Duke unless the parchments you demanded were signed and delivered to you. My God, Eteri, must I tell you this? Cavalcanti sank to a seat and took his head in his hands. You are right, he said. I deserve all your reproaches. I have been a fool. Worse, I have wanted for courage. And then, suddenly, he reared his head again and his glance kindled. But it is not yet too late, he cried and started up. It is still time. Time, sneered Galato. Why? The boy is in their hands. It is hostage for hostage now. A very different matter. He is lost, irretrievably lost, he ended, groaning. We can but avenge him. To save him is beyond our power. No, said Cavalcanti. It is not. I am a dotard, and I've been the cause of it. Then I shall pay the price. What price? Quoth the condottiero, pondering the other with an eye that held no faintest gleam of hope. Within an hour you shall have in your hands the necessary papers to set Agostino at liberty, and you shall carry them yourself to Rome. It is the amend I owe you. It shall be made. But how is it possible? It is possible, and it shall be done. And when it is done, you may count upon me to the last breath to help you to pull down this pestilential Duke in ruin. He strode to the door, his step firm once more and his face set, though it was very gray. I will leave you now, but you may count upon fulfillment of my promise. He went out, leaving Galato and Falcone alone, and the condottiero flung himself into a chair and sat there moodily, deep in thought, still in his dusty garments and with no thought for changing them. Falcone stood by the window, looking out upon the gardens and not daring to intrude upon his master's mood. Thus Cavalcanti found them an hour later. When he returned, he brought a parchment, to which was appended a great seal bearing the pontifical arms. He thrust it into Galeotto's hand. There, he said, is the discharge of the debt which through my weakness and folly I have incurred. Galeotto looked at the parchment, then at Cavalcanti, and then at the parchment once more. It was a papal bull of plenary pardon, an indemnity to me. How came you by this? He asked, astonished. Is not Farnese the Pope's son? Quoth Cavalcanti scornfully. But upon what terms was it conceded? If it involves your honor, your life, or your liberty, here is to make an end of it. And he held a cross in his hands, as if to tear it. Looking up at the Lord Pagliano, it involves none of these, the latter answered steadily. You had best set out at once. The Holy Office can be swift to act.